Hey everyone, welcome to another Modern Deck Tech. Today, Jund Tarmodrazi. So, as some of you already know, Teamer Tarmodrazi is a deck I've deck teched a couple of times on this channel. It was the first match I ever, actually it was the first video I ever posted on this channel. It was a Teamer Tarmodrazi video. And yeah, that's been a really fun deck. It's Teamer colors, playing Tarmogoyf alongside Eldrazi. And I always have fun playing with it. And I said, you know what? What other color combinations can make this deck viable? Now, I've done this before with Tarmohawk, which is a deck style or a deck archetype that I came up with. I don't know if I was the first one. I might be. Maybe I am. But if you haven't seen my Tarmohawk series from last year, where I played 3 different variations of that deck idea, check it out. But yeah, so Tarmodrazi in Jund has a pretty interesting play. So let's dive right into it and see what the main differences are, cutting blue and adding black. So companion-wise, I went back to playing Gigantha. Now in Teamer Tarmodrazi, I did play with Gigantha here and there. First iteration had it, second iteration did not. Now that I'm going back, I see no reason not to play Gigantha. Again, there's no card in the deck that stops me from playing it, and having an extra threat for late game, it's really just more of a why not. And if I really needed a 15th slot in the sideboard for some other card, then I'll get rid of Gigantha, but I see no reason not to be playing this companion in this deck. So, I mean, maybe that's not the best reason, but it's the reason I got, and it's the reason I'm going with. So the core doesn't change for Jund Tarmodrazi, unsurprisingly. So you're still playing 4 Tarmogoyfs, you're still playing 4 Thought-Knot Seers, and you're still playing 4 Reality Smashers. All 4 cards, or all 4 creatures I should say, are still very relevant in Modern. Tarmogoyf, yes, it's fallen out of favor here and there, but hey, ever since Uro got banned, Tarmogoyf was back in the top 10, so take that. Tarmogoyf's a great creature, it always will be. And in this deck, it's going to often be a 4-5 or 5-6, because we're also playing artifacts. And yeah, you'll see a few other cards that help it out as well. Thought-Knot Seer is, you know, hand disruption on a stick. I guess that's the best way. Your opponent is not discarding that card, they're exiling it, which also is relevant. And it's a 4-4 body for 4. So, you know, Fatal Push has a harder time dealing with it. It's not going to be bolted, at least not with 1. And yeah, it's a nice little body you could attack with every turn. Reality Smasher, of course, is just a beast. A 5-5 for 5, trample, haste. And when you target it with a spell, well, it gets countered unless you discard a card, so boo-hoo for your opponent. So all 4 creatures are really powerful in their own way, and they come together quite nicely in this kind of a shell. The other creatures, well, you're only really playing Noble Hierarch. So between Jund Tarmodrazi and Teamer Tarmodrazi, man, try saying those deck names really fast one after the other. The creatures don't change. I was also playing 4 Noble Hierarchs in the Teamer version. I'm playing 4 here. Again, no real reason not to. So yes, Noble Hierarch is only going to be producing green, that's relevant. White and blue are not present in this deck, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, Noble Hierarch is there for the Exalted trigger, and it doesn't really matter what color it produces other than green, because green is going to be the most relevant for you no matter what version you're playing. Because green is going to be perfectly fine for Tarmogoyf, Reality Smasher, or Thought-Knot Seer. So Noble Hierarch playing 4 of, definitely important in this deck. The Cantrips, well, you know, Mishra's Bubble is basically a cantrip. We all know what Mishra's Bubble does. It's an artifact which helps feed Traverse the Elvenwald's Delirium, which we'll be seeing in a second, and it helps you grow your Tarmogoyf as well. All very relevant. It's been a great card here. I definitely would always play Mishra's Bauble, I believe, in any Tarmodrazi list. The removal, Lightning Bolt, that doesn't change. What does change is everything else. So we're also playing 2 Fatal Pushes, 2 Dreadbores, and 2 Assassin's Trophies. So I've kind of split the removal here a bit. 2 Fatal Pushes because, you know, Fatal Push is just relatively efficient against most creatures in the meta. Dreadbore is more of your, you know, no restriction creature destruction or Planeswalker destruction, which I really like. It's sorcery speed, but that's okay. Definitely a powerful card, so having 2 of makes sense here. And Assassin's Trophy, mostly for its ability to target lands. That is pretty relevant, and not just lands, but basically anything. and it's in your main board. So it's in your original 6. You don't have to side for it. It can target artifacts, enchantments, whatever it may be. And yeah, it doesn't really matter if it's ramping your opponent. You know, you're getting rid of a permanent that you do not want. The discard. So you're running 3 Inquisition of Kozilek's, or I'm running 3 Inquisition of Kozilek's. I think it's fine. I don't think you need to go any deeper than that. You're running 4 Thought-Knot Seers, so that's, you know, that's relevant. So 4 Thought-Knot Seers plus 3 Inquisition of Kozilek's, more than enough. Thought-Knot Seer are going to be getting out turn 2 or turn 3. So yeah, that's just where we're at with discard. The Tutors. So Ancient Stirrings. You know, Ancient Stirrings is basically the best we got at the moment. That's basically that's what I'm saying. You know, mostly because there are a lot of non-colorless cards in this deck, so there are times where we're going to cast Ancient Stirrings and it's going to whiff. But that's okay, because usually when you're casting Ancient Stirrings, you are most likely looking for a land or an Eldrazi creature. So if the top 5 are neither, well, then you probably do yourself a favor by getting rid of them, putting them at the bottom of your library, because then your odds of, you know, drawing a land next turn or an Eldrazi next turn most likely have increased. So, you know, not the worst card, but yeah, I believe there's a, you know, there was a card that was previewed in Mystical Archive, Abundant Harvest. I believe that's the name. That's coming out in Modern Horizons 2. And I think almost certainly it's going to take Ancient Stirring's spot in these Tarmodrazi lists, because it's just going to hit more often for what we're looking for. But whatever, until then, Ancient Stirrings is what we're going for. Traverse the Elvenwald, also early game, going to help you, you know, get that basic land that you need, whatever color it is. Late game, or mid to late game, I should say, you're basically going for Reality Smasher. Let's be honest, you're almost always going for Reality Smasher, just so you could smash your opponent's face and end the game quickly. So yeah, that's Traverse the Elvenwald, works really well here. Delirium is almost always being turned on. So the lands don't change too much in terms of structure compared to the Teamer list. Obviously, I'm swapping all the blue producing lands for black producing lands, but the actual ratios don't really change. You know, yeah, I mean, it's as simple as that. So you can take a look at it here. We have 1 Overgrown Tomb, 1 Stomping Ground, 2 Corpulsant Forests, 3 Larnoir Wastes, and then you have, you know, split between Wooded Foothills and Bloodstained Mire for your fetches, 4 Eldrazi Temple, because of course, and then one of each of the following: Forest, Mountain, Swamp, and Wastes. So yeah, I mean, I included 1 of each of the basics, which I also do for Teamer list, because I mean, listen, this mana base is a tad painful. So if you want an option to go for a basic as opposed to, let's say, a shock, you have it. Also, you have targets for your Traverse the Elvenwald. So all of that is really relevant. So I think having 1 of each is perfectly safe. And of course, you definitely need at least 1 Wastes. So there you go. All right, Sideboard. Alpine Moon. You can't play Blood Moon, but you can still play Alpine Moon. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. Still going to be important against some decks, in particular primetime decks. So that's really the main purpose there. You know, if you're playing blue-white control, it might come in handy for some of their lands as well, like Celestial Colonnade. So 3 Alpine Moon I think is still good, but you can probably cut some depending on what you're seeing in your own meta. 3 Veil of Summers I think is still pretty much a hard requirement for decks like this that are running green. Feed the Clan 2 of, so I mean, all, you know, 3 of your 4 creatures are going to be triggering Ferocious almost always. I mean, 2 of your 4 creatures are always going to trigger Ferocious. Tarmogoyf will almost always be a 4/5 plus anyway, so gaining 10 life consistently is going to be pretty important when you're playing against more aggro style decks that are, you know, hitting you quite hard. You do have a painful mana base, so playing Feed the Clan is kind of important. Engineered Explosives being your sweeper of choice. You could play something else in its stead if you really wanted to. Anger of Gods, Kozilek's Return, I believe. All of that works fine, but I'm still enjoying Engineered Explosives. Cling to Dust for your Graveyard Hate. Not the best Graveyard Hate, but the Graveyard Hate I'm going with. Mostly also because it can gain you life. So this is also something you could bring in when you're playing against aggro decks. Small little aggro decks where, you know, most likely you're going to be taking out at least some of their creatures. So Cling to Dust does a pretty good job of getting rid of those creatures from the graveyard. Not that they're too much of a concern for you, but you also gain 3 life out of them. So That's pretty important. And when you don't need the life, well, you can draw a card instead, so that's also pretty good. Then you're running a split of Deglamour and Unravel the Aether for Heliod decks, for as long as Heliod is still legal. You're going to need cards like this to deal with those types of decks. Last but not least, the matchup. So, combo. Yeah, spell-based combo, you're pretty much screwed. If you're lucky with the discard early on, with Inquisition of Kozilek, getting maybe a turn 2 or turn 3 Thought-Knot Seer, then you might be able to disrupt them enough and get rid of the, the main cards that they need, so you can, beat them down. But you have no permission, unlike the Timur Tarmodrazi list. So that's really going to be kind of painful. And you could bring in some cards from the side, for example, Alpine Moon, to maybe, slow them down in terms of their mana. But it's going to be an uphill battle, just telling you from now. So if you're playing a lot of Storm decks in your meta, might not be the best choice for you. If you're playing a lot of Primetime decks, I think you're perfectly fine. I think you're well matched there. And if anything, I wouldn't mind playing Primetime decks because you have so much hate in the main board, and then the sideboard just makes it worse for your opponent. So yeah, it really depends on the type of deck you're playing. When it comes to aggro, it's really going to be a race. I mean, on the blind, if you don't know you're playing aggro, that might be bad because you might not keep the most optimal hand. But if you know you are playing aggro, then make sure you mulligan accordingly so you don't have a really slow start. But again, I mean, the minute you get a Tarmogoyf or a Thought-Knot Seer or a Reality Smasher on the battlefield, your opponents are going to start having a tough time dealing with it. So a lot of the aggro decks are, do have a lot of damage-based removal. So Blitz, Burn, whatever it is. And it's just going to take them more resources to get rid of your get rid of your creatures. And that's what you want. You want them to waste a lot more resources taking care of your creatures as opposed to going to your face. And if you get, a couple of Thought-Knot Seers or a couple of creatures on the battlefield other than Noble Hierarch, you could start attacking them with one of them or two of them, leaving one behind, and it's going to make your opponent, think twice about attacking on the flip side, because they know you're going to block their most important creature and kill it, and most likely you'd be willing to sacrifice one of yours to take out an important one of theirs. So once you do get rolling, I think the odds go into your favor. You just need to, survive that early game. And the sideboard is really going to help you here with, for example, cards like Feed the Clan or Cling to Dust. So keep that in mind. I don't think aggro is the worst matchup here. I played plenty of aggro decks with the Temur list and the Jund list. Not so much, but enough. I'm relatively confident. But again, those decks can be really explosive. So if you have, if you just don't draw well, they're going to overrun you. It's going to be really hard to come back. Big mana decks. So, depending on the big mana deck you're playing, I mean, your creatures are going to be as big as theirs if they're playing Eldrazi lists. So you're pretty much okay there, and you can get them out pretty as quickly as they can for the most part. Maybe sometimes even quicker, thanks to Eldrazi Temple. So not too much of a concern. You do have Alpine Moon in the side. Your main concern, obviously, is going to be their Planeswalkers. So you do run Dreadbore, and you do run Assassin's Trophy, and those cards are definitely relevant and important for these matchups. So hopefully you draw into them. If you're playing a lot of big mana decks in your meta, you might want to sideboard accordingly, modify your sideboard a bit more, in particular Ugin, because you really don't want to have to deal with Ugin. But yeah, just, keep that in mind. But you do have, a lot of tools at your disposal in this list. So even if they cast an Ugin and try and get rid of your big Eldrazi, then it gets them into bolt range, and you can take care of Ugin relatively easily in that scenario. So yeah, play right. Try and anticipate what they're going to be doing, like you should be doing for every deck, to be fair. And I think big mana decks can be dealt with, not easily, but they can be dealt with. That's something I could say confidently with this list. Not Magic, well, yeah, I pretty much put my hands up in the air on that one. You bring in your sideboard, you hope for the best. Again, your creatures are big, so if you're playing Dredge, unless they get the nuts, and they go off turn 2, and they have, 16 creatures on the battlefield, yay them. But apart from that scenario, your creatures are pretty big, so you can put a lot of pressure on them, and yeah, they're gonna have to think twice about attacking in with some of their creatures because they're just gonna be getting rid of them. Pack in more graveyard hate if you're really coming up against a lot of Dredge, which may be the case soon. So yeah, keep that in mind. The sideboard can help you fix those win percentages if necessary. Control. All right, well, control. Meh. You do have Veil of Summer. Yeah, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing to say. You keep in mind, I mean, a lot of the control decks right now are just running Stoneblade, right? They're playing Stoneforge Mystic Plus in different colors. So you do have plenty of removal, for example, to deal with their artifacts. Batterskull, any of the swords. You do have, Dreadboard to deal with Batterskull, at least initially, at least the Germ token. You do have Assassin's Trophy to deal with any of the artifacts. And you do have plenty of removal to get rid of Stoneforge Mystic to, potentially stop it from cheating in some of those artifacts a bit earlier than necessary. So, again, it really comes down to who fires first and, how good of a hand you keep. It's kind of weird when I say things like that because it seems obvious. But sometimes you keep suboptimal hands because you think you could get around certain things. Well, against control decks, you just have to be careful. And again, as I always say, if you're playing more control in your meta, well, then you could adjust accordingly. All the tools are available to you in Jund colors in this deck. So if you need to play more Assassin's Trophies, then do that and cut Dread Wars or cut Fatal Pilches. Whatever it is. Or maybe, stock your sideboard differently. Maybe cut Gigantha. You get an extra slot on your sideboard. Maybe cut the Engineer Explosives for something else. You have a lot of options. You could be very flexible here to adjust to whatever decks you expect to play against. Last but not least, mid-range decks. Your tools more or less mimic theirs. Your creatures often are bigger than theirs, apart from Death's Shadow, which you can deal with multiple ways, even in the main, and I'm not mentioning the side that has other tools to get rid of it. So, yeah, my mid-range matches are pretty good, unless they have the nuts in the discard early game, which is often the case. I still have a theory that for some reason MTGO prioritizes discard spells in the opener. It must, because I always get Thoughtseize or Inquisition Kozilek's turn 1. Always. Like 9 out of 10 times. So either it's like a bad luck against me or there's something off. But yeah, mid-range decks, not the worst matches you can have. They're actually pretty decent. And the more comfortable you get with this deck, the better your win percentages will be. That much I can guarantee. Alright, so that's it for Jund Tarmodrazi. I had a fun time playing with this version of Tarmodrazi. I really like the Tarmodrazi shell or Tarmodrazi archetype, just like how I like the Tarmohawk archetype, which I'll be getting back to very soon. So stay tuned for that. But let me know what you think about Jund Tarmodrazi. What do you think about dropping blue for black? Yeah, let me know in the comment section down below. Stay tuned for the 3 matches that I'll be posting up later today, as usual. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you enjoy my content in general, please subscribe, hit the notification bell. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, share my content on social media. All that stuff really helps me out a lot. Watching more of my videos, from start to finish, that also helps me out a lot. Helps with the YouTube algorithm. So, do all of that for me. I would really, really appreciate it. Anyone would help. If you could do all, that's fantastic as well. If you want to support this channel on Patreon, check out the link in the description of this video as well. Check out my Patreon rewards, basically rewards that you get guaranteed at the end of every year. That's all detailed on Patreon. Thanks, and have a good one.